Welcome back to the Underground Strategy podcast. My name is Max, and I'm here as usual with Tony. Today we have a very exciting guest, Andrew Balaam, a former Selous scout that fought in the Rhodesian Bush War. Welcome to the show, Andy, and how are you feeling today?
I'm well, thanks, Max. Yourself?
I am absolutely fantastic. Thank you for asking, Andy. I think a good place to start off today would be if you could tell us a bit about your background so we can start unpacking the story of Andrew Balaam.
Good day, listeners. My name is Andrew James Balaam. I'm the second oldest child in a family of 10 children. I was born in a town called Bulawayo in then Southern Rhodesia, where I spent a lot of my youth. I then moved up to a place where Livingston, where I spent the majority of my childhood. From there, my father then moved us up to Ndola, which is then in the then Northern Rhodesia. After spending several years in Ndola and several failed job attempts, I then returned back to Bulawayo, where I joined my uncle, who was going to help me look for a job.
You mentioned Southern Rhodesia there, and could you give a bit of context to our listeners about Southern Rhodesia, what it is today in terms of a modern country, and then maybe we go on a little bit to your military service?
Southern Rhodesia was basically a British colony. It came into existence since 1923, part of the then British Empire. It was a self-governing province or state or country, however you want to look at it. And then in 1953, it joined up with then Northern Rhodesia and Nyasaland, and they became the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland. This carried on till about 1963. Everything went well. In 1963, the winds of change, as Harold Macmillan called it, started sweeping through Africa. And all the countries to the north started getting independence. The Rhodesians decided, in their wisdom or for whatever reason, that they did not want to become part of the change that was taking place in Africa, and they would prefer to keep Rhodesia under white rule. And to do this, they declared UDI in 1965, I think it was. This declaration of UDI would then lead onto sanctions by the British and by the Western world and would start the Rhodesian War of Independence. That's just a brief history. Rhodesia was a landlocked country. Personally, I don't think it had much chance of survival with all the rest of the world pitched against it, but we tried.
Yeah, and then you found yourself in this context of, as you mentioned, an Africa that's decolonizing. The winds of change are sweeping over, as you mentioned. And then you'd done some service. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Rhodesian light infantry and what the Selous Scouts and the SAS were at that time in what we call today modern Zimbabwe?
Okay, right. We'll start off with the SAS. I didn't know much. Still don't know much about the SAS. I never joined the SAS, so I do not know anything about their training. I have worked with the SAS once in Mozambique, north of the Zambezi River. We went in, I can't remember for what reason, but the basic was to try and disrupt the Zanda supplies into then Rhodesia. And I worked with the SAS guys. They were well trained. I didn't notice any difference in their training and our training. There was a few things that were different, like simple things like when we were based up for the night, we used to split up and put up our little bivvy and sleep in it. We had a guard on at night, and our bivvies were basically just above ground level. The SAS guys, they preferred to put their ground sheets at eye level. They said it gave less profile for the terrorists to notice or any person walking past in that area to notice them. Us in RLI, we had a guard at night. SAS, the guy I was with, I think his name was Horst Greenoff, made us all sleep in a circle with our feet touching, and we woke each other up during the night to pass on the guard shift. But like I say, I knew a couple of SAS guys, but I did not know their training. I did not enter the SAS. My idea was when I left up Northern Rhodesia in a town called Ndola, I left there. I had several jobs there, all of which ended up in a disaster. My father sent me down to Bulawayo, where I was going to join my uncle, who was going to help me find a job. One thing led to another. I spent more time fishing and shooting than looking for a job. But in due course, I got the call up from the then Rhodesian army to come and do my national service. Julia pitched at the appointed place in Bulawayo, went in, and while I was waiting to fill in papers, I saw the pictures of the SAS jumping out of aeroplanes, doing scuba diving, and then being young and stupid, I decided that was the life for me. So instead of signing up for my national service, I joined the RLI. Once I got to RLI, I realized that the army really wasn't what I had in mind. My idea of adventure and doing amazing things was just my ideas. The army had completely different ideas. I, in the end, ended up doing 2 recruit courses. The first recruit course, I decided that if I did badly enough, I'd get thrown off and out the army. At that time, my training officer in my recruit course was Ron Daly. In due course, I got back squatted from a first recruit course onto the second one, and he called me in, explained to me that I could do whatever I liked, but they weren't going to throw me off. And it was up to me. I could pass, do what I'm supposed to do and pass, or continue to do recruit course after recruit course. So getting my mind into gear, I managed to pass my second recruit course. I myself by nature am a bit of a casual, laid-back, sarcastic person. None of this was appreciated in the Rhodesian army. My sarcasm dropped me into more trouble than it was worth. I could not handle the screaming, the shouting. It seemed to me achieve nothing. If you got to scream and threaten and shout to get somebody to do something, you shouldn't be in charge in the first place. Anyway, that was my opinion. Like I said, it wasn't agreed to by the rest of the army. After due course, I got promotion. I reached the dizzy height of, I think it was sergeant in the RLI. Sergeant was a great rank. I had my batman, I had my own bed, I had waiters serving me dinner. It was like heaven. But I still wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with the discipline, the shouting, the screaming. It just wasn't my style. At this stage, I started to hear stories about a unit called the Selous Scouts. I had a friend in there by the name of Yanni Nell. One day, while myself and a couple of my friends, we had just finished doing a bit of a workout in the gym, Yanni Nell approached us and did the normal salesman trip about how great it was. You could grow your hair and have a beard, and there was no screaming, there was no shouting. Pubs stayed open for endless hours, and you were own boss. Sounded like heaven on earth. Volunteered, went down to Kariba, did the selection, passed, ended up in Salisbury, now Harare, a place called Nkoma Barracks. They were still busy building it. It was a tin barracks. It wasn't a permanent thing. And I arrived. It was a better setup as far as I'm concerned. Like Annie said, there was not much screaming and shouting. You expected to discipline yourself, and all was well. As time went along, I discovered in Selous Scouts, there was like most other units, I don't know, I'm just plucking air there, most other units, but in Selous Scouts, there was a very divided into 2 camps. The fan club camp, for the want of a better word, and the non-fan camp. And I did notice from quite early this divide between the fan club and the non-fan club. Selous Scouts, as far as I'm concerned, this is my opinion. It's nobody else's opinion. To be a Selous scout, you had to pass the selection and you had to pass the dark phase. Once you had passed those, Selous scouts' whole existence was pseudo-operations. The Rhodesian army was struggling. We had good soldiers, we had good this, we had good that. But we couldn't find the terrorists to fight them, to annihilate them, to eliminate them, destroy them, call it what you want. We had a couple of OPs that had a limited success. We had a bit of tracking, also limited success, but nothing compared to what was required to try and stem the tide. We needed something better. Selous scouts then came into existence. Now, as far as, like I said previously, it's a pseudo-operation. And to be a Selous scout, you need to pass those two criteria. Sad, you might think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. In the whole of Selous scouts, which was what, 500, it was maybe 1820 actual whites or Selous scouts that actually did pseudo-ops, which was the whole essence of Selous scouts. In the end, we had the assault group, we had the recce group, we had this group, we had that group, we had this group, all sorts of groups. None of them were there to do what Selous scouts was designed to do: infiltrate the locals, the terrorists, and try and locate them so that we could then call in fire force to destroy them. To me, that's what Selous scouts was all about. And it's like I said, a sad thing to say, whites was 18 or 20. The majority of Selous scouts was the black dudes, the African soldier. He was Selous scouts. Everybody thinks the Selous scouts, all those owned with the long hair and the beards, riding on the back of the trucks, going into Mozambique to destroy this camp and that camp. There was nothing special about that. Everybody was doing it. If you had nothing to do, okay, once again, my opinion, if you had nothing to do, you get a couple of trucks, load them up with some guys, poof, off you go into Mozambique and do your thing. I don't know. So, maybe I've gone to run off here, but that is my belief. That is what I believe. So out of all those people that were in Selous scouts, whites-wise, it was 18 to 20 that were actually Selous scouts. The rest, the job that they did was done by the RLI, the SAS, numerous Rhodesian national service units were capable of doing exactly the same thing. The thing that made Selous scouts unique was its ability to infiltrate. It was the pseudo-operation. Nothing else. SAS were brilliant in their line of work. Their recce's deep penetration work was outstanding. It was brilliant. There was no fingers pointed to the SAS. It got so bad at one stage that I think Colonel Robinson, was then the charge of the SAS, and we had Rhodesian. There was a Morris fight between Rhodesian and Robinson, and I assume the Army HQ. Robinson was accusing Rhodesian of using the scouts to do what was SAS work, and it all blew up out of hand, and Rhodesian banned Colonel Robinson from coming to our camp, and then we had night patrols, and because there was a story that the SAS guys were going to come and take out our control room.
Very interesting, Andy. And I think it's good that you're explaining the difference between, or you're showing the difference between the Rhodesian SAS, Selous Scouts, and the RLI. Those are quite commonly mushed together if you're looking outside of South Africa and the UK. You mentioned the pseudo-operations, and I know you talk about them in your book. Could we talk a bit about the objectives? What were the objectives of the pseudo-operations?
The objective, the Rhodesian army was well trained, was well equipped. The problem was we couldn't find the terrorists. They had done their homework. The locals supported them. So the only way that we could find those terrorists was go through the locals. The locals, they had what they called the Mujibas. These guys were the front line of defense for the terrorists. So for us now, to locate the terrorists, we had to convince the locals that we were in fact terrorists. And so once we sat down and started chatting, they would tell us, okay, there's another group of you guys over here. There was another group of you guys over here. In fact, we had to convince the locals that we were in fact terrorists. And once we were accepted by the locals and had passed the test laid down to us by the Mujibas, the information would come to us of where the different groups were. And we could use this information, use it, do a recce, pinpoint the position of the terrorists and call in the fire force, which in the whole was basically RLI or RAR. On occasion, SAS also did the fire force. But that was the purpose of Selous Scouts, whether we did it internally in the country or externally. It was a pseudo-operation, and that what was it all about. That was the existence, the purpose of Selous Scouts. RAR, RLI, brilliant. Fire Force troops, brilliant for used on ops into Mozambique or Botswana, or wherever the case may be. But pseudo work to locate the terrorists, that was the sole purpose of Selous Scouts, as far as I'm concerned. And later on, okay, we had the recce group, and like I said previously mentioned, became the big fight between RLI, well, not so much RLI, between SAS and Selous Scouts. There was a big story about that we didn't be allowed to have wings. And if we got wings, we weren't supposed to be paid any extra for it because that was a SAS thing. And it eventually blew up out of proportion. I mean, I did my para course down in South Africa in Duku Duku, which to me was like a holiday camp because I'd heard some vicious stories about the Rhodesian parachute training, which is normal Rhodesian army stuff. Lots of shouting and screaming. To me, that was the purpose of Selous Scouts. That's what made it unique. That's what made it different to your other unit. RLI was a brilliant unit. SAS was brilliant. In their fields, they were unsurpassed. They could match anybody in anything. We were different.
Andy, building on that, and I like the way you put that, and you bring out that inter-service rivalry and inter-army rivalry. And just building on that, a question from one of our listeners, Martin Cornell, he says, what did being a Selous Scout depend on? What were the abilities and training needed?
Okay, right. Okay, let me start. Let me put it like this way. SAS, brilliant soldiers, guys trained, especially adapted to the right mindset to operate for long periods of time by themselves. On the other hand, you got RAR, RLI. Also well-trained, brilliant soldiers, but also not only having the ability to operate by themselves, but also having leadership qualities. SAS, like I said, a loner unit, not leadership qualities, maybe not as important like is in RLI. Now you take those two guys, you take the quality from the SAS, his ability to operate for long periods by himself, not being having told every 5 minutes what to do. And you take the leadership qualities from the RLI and you mold those two together. You then have what was required from the Selous Scouts. You had to have the ability to lead when the time came. And you also had to have the ability to operate by yourself for long periods of time. I spent most of my career in Selous Scouts operating by myself. At one stage, I spent 53 days or 57 days, I'm not sure, alone by myself, trying to capture a terrorist by the name of Donkey. And that's how long it took to actually achieve the result of actually pinpointing Donkey and bringing Fire Force down on him and sorting him out. So that's the way, if you ask me, that's the best way that I can describe what is needed to be a Selous Scout soldier. That to me, look, a lot of guys in Selous Scouts, there was a lot of back doors open. There's a lot of guys that came in that didn't do the selection, didn't do anything. I've seen those same guys that didn't do the selection, didn't do the dark face, actually running courses for guys that volunteered to do that course. How can you put somebody that didn't do the course and the selection himself and do the dark face in charge of teaching other people how to do it if you didn't know how to do it yourself?
We lost you at the cliffhanger of what happened to Donkey.
Oh, no. Donkey, eventually we pinned him down in a village. Donkey had a new tactic. And then it became common later on, but then at his stage it was new. He used to actually live in the village. He didn't have a base camp outside where you could pick up the locals going to feed him or whatever the case may be. Donkey used to live in the village. So it was very difficult to pinpoint him, but eventually we managed to pin him down and we called in the fire force and Donkey was sorted out.
For me, it's always fascinating to hear how these targets, terrorists, other people in the circle get their names and designations. I've come across plenty in my career, of course, names like Cossack, Tailor, Madman, Idiot, but Donkey is a very memorable one. But I want to tie into something you mentioned earlier about operating alone, how crucial it is to take leadership and make decisions independently and rely entirely on yourself. That kind of reflects the whole nature of the profession, because as soon as you start working with something that is in the shadows, you often find yourself alone, and you need to develop that kind of stamina so you can push through both in your career and your day-to-day life. So it is definitely not for everyone, and it takes a very certain kind of person to thrive in that environment. Speaking of that, it makes me wonder about the operations you've been a part of, Andy. We have had our fair share of military operations around this table in different shapes and forms, of course. And personally, some of them, they cling to my mind. You can never forget them. And some, they just disappear like they never happened. And do you have any, Andy, any operations that stand out as significant or important, either for you personally or for the success of your unit?
Look, I could say Op Eland, where we managed to eliminate a couple of thousand, or I could say maybe Long John. But to me, the operation that I thought that I learned the most, that opened the doors for the Rhodesian army, was the first cross-border raid we did by vehicle, Operation Detachment. Okay, this was our first effort. What this operation proved to us, or gave us the access to penetrate deep into Mozambique. We no longer had to just patrol up and down the borders, trying to ambush the terrorists as they came into the country. We could now, with the use of vehicles and our pseudo ability, go deep into Mozambique and hit the big camps. So to me, sure, we didn't kill anybody on that op, well, not to my knowledge, but it opened the doors, because that was one of the big problems they had in the Rhodesian army. It's fine patrolling up and down the border. Maybe now and again you'd hit a bit of luck and one of your ambushes would pay off. But you couldn't get to the source. The source was too deep into Mozambique. You didn't have the backup. We had no support. We couldn't just take 10 guys and say, okay, right, guys, we're going into Mozambique. We're going to such and such a camp. It's 200 Ks in. You have to carry your food, your water. You have to hide all the time. If anybody saw you, you would be in big trouble and you'd be ambushed, you'd be compromised, and you would fail to achieve your aim. So that is why, to me, Op Detachment, the first Selous Scouts vehicle penetration into Mozambique, even though it wasn't deep or shallow, it did open the doors to future operations from which Long John and Eland, and in the end, like I said, it became like, if you've got nothing else to do, jump in a truck and visit Mozambique. But to me, that was the most important op that I was involved on.
Just for our listeners, Andy, when you say Mozambique, and we know that you were operating in Zimbabwe, it's just a bit of context there was with many of the frontline states and the freedom movements, there would be liberation fighters in neighboring countries. So Namibia would have Angola and Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Just for some context for our listeners, because obviously you are right in the detail, which is perfect. But just to explain why you mentioning Mozambique there.
Mozambique was for us one of the major training areas, major camps, major countries supporting the terrorists. Okay, the Portuguese, while the Portuguese were there, it wasn't so bad. But once the Portuguese collapsed and moved out, and Frelimo took over, Frelimo were big supporters of the local freedom fighters entering into Rhodesia. We had no way of getting to these camps. The camps were too deep into Mozambique. The only way we could get in was by vehicle. That is why I said, like I said earlier on, that Operation Detachment was to me one of the most important operations I had been. Mozambique was, for one half of the country, the major source of terrorist resupply, training, and that sort of thing. So that's why it was important for us to get into Mozambique and try and stem the tide.
Mm-hmm. No, we get that, and it sounds like real adventure, and of course we don't make light of that when we say adventure. We know it was very serious business, and when you look at it afterwards, and Nelson Mandela said, "We've had a big fight, we've had a good fight. Now let's all move forward together." That was for South Africa, but do you find also in Zimbabwe that the governments, whether they or South Africa, support the former soldiers, both freedom fighters and the soldiers of the state? Because both were just doing their job, right? These were just normal people, obviously highly talented, highly, very effective, but whether freedom fighter or whether national soldier. And do you find that it's the soldiers on both sides are just a little bit forgotten, or do you find there's any kind of support?
I don't know. If you read that book of mine, Skuzapu, if you read there, the first half is basically by one of stories that I got from one of my pseudo-operations. We joined up together. We wrote a book on pseudo-operations for a change from his point of view as a black pseudo-operator, not from a white guy's point of view. Now, if you read that book, you'll see at the end that he, in fact, was quite well received by the new Mugabe government. Obviously, Selous Scouts was disbanded. There was no final parade or goodbye, thank you for service or anything like that. It was disbanded. I was still working in the bush when that unit was disbanded. When I got back in the barracks, there was no unit. It was finished. Everybody had left. Anyway, as I was saying, this is his story. And if you read that book, he got accepted quite well. After the collapse of the then Rhodesian regime, they formed a different unit with all those guys from Selous Scouts. The Selous Scouts was 99% black, and there was a lot of guys that stayed. A lot of the tours went back to their tribal trust lands, their villages, but a lot of those guys were professional soldiers. So they joined them up with some RAR guys, and they formed a unit. For the like of me, I cannot remember what the name of that unit is. But those guys, it's all mentioned in the book, like I said, that those guys were used for various things. Like one of the tasks that they had was after the war was finished, you had Zipra and you had Sanlam. So you had Joshua Nkoma's dudes and you had Mugabe's dudes. Everybody wanted to be the boss. So what they did is they brought in groups from the holding areas into Salisbury. Half of the groups was Mugabe's guys, half the groups were Joshua Nkoma's guys. The tensions were high, very high, and they used these ex-Rhodesian army guys to patrol in between these groups and stop the fighting, any fighting that would possibly take place. The tension, from what my ex-pseudo team commander tells me, was incredible. Like I said, I cover it in the book. the question was, were they well accepted? Yes, they were. And even today, the guy, my ex-pseudo team commander, is friends with all the tours that he knew or that then supported Mugabe. There's even one of the guys that he meets up with on his patrols, separating Zipra and Zanu. He's one of the guys that if you also read the book, that 6th Troop, at one stage, they lost 6 guys, shot sleeping, shot by a tame tour. That wasn't as tame as obviously everybody thought. But he, on his patrols in between these two factions, he met the same guy and he spoke to the guy and he asked him, why did you kill those people? I mean, you said you joined Selous Scouts, you were happy to work for them. Why did you kill them? He said, no, he just said that because he was scared they were going to kill them. And his plan was, on the first chance he got, he was going to run away and, if possible, kill those people and go back to his terrorist organization. I don't know, I've lost track of what I've been saying.
No, you're good. You're very good.
You're good. That's a heavy story. That is a heavy one. It just shows the nuance, right, Max? There's this loyalties. It's an intelligence game of interest versus friendships, and we know interest wins out.
It usually does. It usually does.
So Mugabe welcomed them because he had well-trained, well-disciplined people that he could use to deploy to stop any potential problems that might arise between Zipra and Zanla. So yes, they were well. On my half, I don't know. Like I said, when I got back from the bush, the unit was disbanded. I got my pension, jumped in a Land Rover with my friend Pete Mack, the Land Rover we stole from the security branch, ex-Rhodesian security branch, and headed for Beitbridge and crossed into South Africa. I don't know if I've covered what you want me to cover.
You have.
Very good.
But that Andy, it's a story with a very abrupt ending. How did it feel when you got back from the bush and your unit is disbanded and then you just leave because you had quite a few intensive years behind you?
I don't know. What did I feel? I don't know. Sometimes maybe I felt a bit of relief that I was still alive. I felt sadness that I'd wasted all those years trying to maybe achieve an impossible dream. But I think there was also a bit of relief because, at the end there, it was a total mess. We had guys reporting daily for all sorts of things, rhino poaching, and this was guys in the Scouts. And then we had the telephone bugging. We had the fighting between that's wrong, between SAS and Selous Scout. The bickering. We had Hickman. I remember when Hickman got made general in charge of the army. He came out there to our camp at Nkoma. We had a big pub there called the Round Bar. That's where everybody went to drink. It was a non-racial, non-rank bar, just a place to have a good drink, sing songs and talk rubbish. Hickman came there. He came dressed up in his uniform, shiny, bright, super, stood there. Like my friend said, oh, look, it's Gary Glitter. There he stood, legs apart, tip shining, what, and says to the mob who are half drunk, the mob that's us, who are half drunk, having a good time, and says to us, well, no matter what happens, if you died for this country, you will have earned yourself 6 feet of good Rhodesian soil. I don't think that was the right thing to say, and neither did anybody else. But that is the stage where it got there. Everybody was a politician. Everybody was looking after themselves. It was now that the writing was on the wall. Yeah, the mob were the mob. That was us. It was now everybody looking after themselves. It was, if you, Jack, I'm all right. I don't know, maybe I'm going overboard, but that's the impression I got. That's what I felt.
Andy, you have these striking memories. You mentioned, the general coming in, the pips shining, and of course, very different from the guys, in the pub, just having a few drinks, facing on the cold face of it all. And you have all these memories, and you bring these things forward. It becomes a bit of an adventure novel, right? Like, even though I mean that in the nicest way, it's your life and it's serious. But the Land Rover and going to Beitbridge, which for our listeners is the border with South Africa and Zimbabwe. And we had a lot of questions from our listeners because you've had this wealth of experiences, real adventures. What is your process for writing up your story? So you have these things in your head. How did you go about that? So many listeners wanted to know how you went about it and a little bit about why.
Okay, right. I went about it when I came out of South Africa. Out of Zimbabwe. I went to South Africa. I went to 5 Rec in Parabora. Things didn't work out so well. Like, the South African army was too, for the want of a better word, religious for me. The army I came from, the Domini didn't have the power that they had in the South African army. Anyway, beside the point, I went into Pretoria, into Zanzibar building to sign on because I thought, I didn't know. It was a strange country. I didn't know anybody. So I thought, okay, I'll go there. I went there to Zanzibar building, and there I met one of our old QRC from Scout, a major by the name of Major Swath. Now, he was our liaison officer. So we went to him, and we were promised a bonus for signing up in the South African army, just to give us a few bob in our pocket because we didn't have any money, and help us out, as it were. We got there, we spoke to Major Swart, and the money was not forthcoming. So we decided to leave and make our own way in South Africa. We then came up into Johannesburg, in Gauteng, and we met up with our old boss, Colonel Rhodesian. So he was looking for guys to work for him. He had just opened a security company as such, and one of his contracts was with Sasol. So he was looking for guys to do a little bit undercover work in Sasol, because Sasol was a bit nervous now. Rhodesia's collapsed. The war was getting a bit heavy in South Africa. They were scared the plant would be infiltrated and people would come in and blow up Sasol, for the want of a better word. That's putting it simply. My job was to try and set up a bit of a undercover network, to try and set up some sort of system where we could monitor what was going on by the use of undercover guys. Okay, it wasn't a very great success. It took forever to get anything going. The turnover was incredible at Sasol. So basically, it never got really further than the planning stage. Now, at this stage, my daddy was then offered a job in the Transkei to go and train the Transkei Defence Force. Plus, at the same time, provide a bodyguard for KD and George Matanzima, Prime Minister and President of the Transkei. For the people that don't know, the Transkei was a homeland within the borders of South Africa, and it was supposedly an independent state where the black people could achieve whatever they wanted to achieve, separate development, for the want of another word. So we went there. Anyway, myself and my friend Pete McNeilich, we were chosen by Rhodesian to go up to the Transkei and be bodyguards for George and KD Matanzima, while all the paperwork and the groundwork was done to get the show on the road, as it were.
I would say that those are pretty significant tasks for a private security company. Quite extensive, even if their success were somewhat mixed.
Yeah, no, it is. Look, I wasn't privy to what was going on. You see, a lot like the Transkei thing, that was done by the South African internal security. That whole thing, I don't know what the aim was, to go there, train the Transkei Army, which we did. Was it to build up the Transkei Army, make it a role model and an example of what could be done with the black people in charge? Or was it to build it up, to make it pro-South African, to try and kill the ANC in that area, to try and take away the power? That was Mandela's home area, the Transkei. The actual political beliefs behind it, the aims, to what they aim to achieve, I don't know. I'm not a political person, so I don't, that's open to debate, the reason why we went to the Transkei.
What did you feel? Because you're pretty fresh out of the Scouts. You have the same people surrounding you, and you are going to work this mission that is a bit unclear in Transkei. What were you thinking about that? Did it make sense at the time, or did it feel weird?
It felt weird. Look, I needed a job, all right? That was the bottom line with me and a lot of guys. We needed a job. We needed salary. We needed to live as well. The Transkei, beautiful sea, warm water, lovely beaches. Yeah, wait. What better could you ask for? Being paid money to go there, swim, suntan, play golf, and train a couple of guys. Get them up to standard as you were, which was fine.
Sounds like an operator's dream.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it sounds like heaven. But now, then you kick in to the Lesotho Liberation Army. You then kick in the attempted overthrow of the Ciskei regime. Like I said, I'm a layman when it comes to this kind of thing. I don't know the political reasons about it. But after we started training the Transkei Army and everything was going good, and then all of a sudden, I was requested to train the Lesotho Liberation Army myself and an I think it's a Marine recon guy, Bob McKenzie. He was in the Rhodesian SAS, well, highly decorated. I think he's got Silver Cross and the Bronze Cross. Anyway, we joined up together and they found us a little bit of isolated farm in the Maluti Mountains. It's close to the Lesotho border. The recruits started arriving and our job was to train them to be terrorists. I just spent 10, 15 years, whatever, fighting against terrorists, saying that I didn't like the way they operated and their doctrine and their aims and how they went about achieving these aims. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, here I am. I'm now training people to do what I previously said was a bad thing. And not only at Lesotho, I was now also training them to do the same thing in the Ciskei.
Because you've showed the difference now from training fighting the liberation groups and then now training them up. But I'm just wondering from them, Max, is it a good segue to the listener question, the big one?
It definitely is. Andy, as we've mentioned earlier, we've had a lot of listener questions, and this next one is quite detailed, so we're going to break it up into smaller parts. One of our listeners brought up something from your book and Eddie Bird's book, where both of you expressed dissatisfaction with certain aspects of how the Selous Scouts were run. Specifically, there is mention of Reed Daly playing favorites and giving certain individuals a bit too much room to maneuver. What is your take on that?
No, it's like I mentioned previously, Max. There was a definite divide in Selous Scouts, the fan club and the non-fan club. And like I previously mentioned, I don't want to mention names. I'm past that pointing finger, but there were a lot of when I say high ranking, I mean non-commissioned guys like WO1s, WO2s, those sort of people that got into the Selous Scouts from different units, mainly the RLI, without doing any form of selection and ending up training people on how to become a Selous Scout. I've mentioned this previously, but how can you train somebody when you yourself don't know what the selection is about, what you're supposed to learn, but you end up in charge of training these people to me, it doesn't make sense. And there were guys there that are now, they're saying they were founder members and all the rest of it. And I remember when I went on those columns and into those raids and into Mozambique, on taking those camps on foot and vehicle, I don't remember seeing any of these coming through the back door founder members with me. They seem to have all the cushy job. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say? I'm sure it's the same in most units, and that's the way it was. I got asked once, I mentioned it in my book, they said to me, what do you think about Redalia? I said, I wrote there what I thought. I mean, I knew the guy. He was my training officer. He was my officer in charge of me in support commander, was my officer in charge of me in Selous Scouts. So I knew the guy. I knew what he was about. And so anyway, I gave my opinion. Didn't go down too well. I got accused of slandering and all sorts of things, So anyway, that's the first part of the question. And definitely there was a definite divide between the haves and the have-nots. For sure, there was no question. Like I said, I still find it amazing now that people that didn't do the selection, that didn't do the dark phase, can then put other people through it. It's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And this is something I've seen in different units around the world. And I think I speak for the larger military community when I say that it's definitely frustrating when there is that kind of divide between those who have gone through the process and those who haven't, because it creates tensions and it can undermine trust and cohesion in a unit completely. So to move on to the question, it actually touches on two significant topics. First, the treatment of fallen Selous scouts during operations. Of course, a deeply sensitive issue that highlights some of the tougher realities of leadership and priorities in the field, I would say. And the second question is, there is a mention about the debacle in Ciskei, an operation in South Africa that seems to have raised its own set of challenges. So, Andy, what is your perspective on both of these questions?
Okay, right. And I know where that comes from. I think it was Operation Long John. That was a raid on Mapai. The gods of war didn't smile down us on that operation. We arrived there, and in the pursuing operation, we had Dal Collett, who got paralyzed, Tim Bax, who got badly shot up, and Yanni Nell, who got killed. After all the dust had settled and we'd done our bit, the helicopters came in. They called in an airstrike on the building where all the fire came from that injured and killed these people. The Leagues came in, struck the building. They then brought in helicopters and took out the injured guys, but they left the dead guy behind. The reason being, I was told, was they wanted to limit air power going into Mozambique. Now, they'd already done a Lynx strike. They'd already sent a helicopter in to uplift the injured, and I agree, injured to go first, dead loss, I don't have a problem. So why couldn't they send in another helicopter to pick up Yanni Nell? They didn't, under the pretext that it would be a compromise, or they didn't, they wanted to cut it down, whatever. So what we did is we put Yanni Nell's body in the back of a commandeered bus, and we bounced him out in that bus back into Rhodesia. I've been involved in things that will stay with me for the rest of my life. But that to me was something I can't get over it. To me, it was so degrading. This was a man who gave his life for his country. This man was a soldier, outstanding soldier. He gets killed fighting for his country. We throw his body in the back of a bus and you take him home. Sad. Very sad.
Andy, what you shared about Yanni now is profoundly moving on a personal level for me. I'm a veteran myself, and it highlights not just the cost of war, but also the very human struggle to preserve dignity and respect even in the chaos of combat. Shifting slightly, you mentioned before how camaraderie within units sometimes extended into unexpected areas, and this brings to mind figures like McGuinness. And when it comes to people like McGuinness, Ken Flowers, and others of that era, do you think the full truth of their roles has ever been properly explored, particularly in media and in the public discussion? There is often talk about a fifth column, for example, but it seems to be dismissed out of hand by many straight away. What is your perspective on this?
Of those guys you mentioned, I didn't know McAllister. I didn't know Ken Flower. The only one I knew there was McGuinness. Okay, he was head of Selous Scouts SB. McGuinness was a nice guy. I mean, we used to call him Father Christmas. Okay, McGuinness, when we were in Scouts, we used to get paid so much per terrorist killed. Like, for example, I located a group. I called in the fire force. 6 terrorists got killed. Right, so therefore we got, I think it was from 0 to 6 was 100 rand or dollars, whatever. And that was the basic thing. That was the sort of, if you got below that, it was 50. So from 1 to 6, if you got 6 and above, you got 100. If you got 5 and below, you got 50. I know it sounds very mercenary, but this was brought in also to give some sort of incentive to the TTs, the tame tours that we had working for us, to give them some sort of incentive. The money came from South Africa. It was not supplied by the Rhodesian government. Now, McGuinness got his name as Father Christmas because every time you came back from the bush and you arrived there and you were due the payment for your troop, McGuinness was the guy that would come with the briefcase, give you the money, and you would then go out and dish it out amongst your troop. So that's where he got the name of Father Christmas. McGuinness himself, like I said, I never met him socially. We didn't go drinking. I was arrested for drunken driving in a Rari event, Salisbury. McGuinness came and got me out of jail. Yeah, he was that sort of guy. But I didn't know him personally. I didn't know what he was involved with apart from being in charge of our SB. I met him later on after the war here in Joburg, in South Africa, Johannesburg. He was a proud owner of 2 quite high-powered bars. So somewhere along the line, I assume he looked after himself. So when the war came, when the end came, he managed to have enough put aside so that he didn't have to struggle. I know he did work for the South Africans at one stage, but what he was involved in, I don't know. Like I said, that's all I really basically know about McGuinness. Part of the fact that he was killed, I believe, by an African guy with a hammer in his house here in Joburg. And that's all I know about McGuinness. The other guys I didn't know. Ken Flower, I knew he was in charge of our CIO. I heard that he was a British agent. I don't know. This is all hearsay. So I haven't a clue. And that's about as far as I can go with that.
From Garrett. And he asks, and I'll read his whole message on that was on Insta. I'd like to ask Andy a bit more about his terrorist kit when operating behind the lines. He speaks of every detail being key. Were the uniforms liquidated from captured terrorists down to the boots, or were they simply workwear or clothing of the era with Chickham-supplied equipment?
Okay, look, the terrorists, they were a mixture of civilian clothing, Frelimo clothing, old Portuguese uniform. It was a mix, a general mix. The big thing there, you as a terrorist must not wear like blue trousers, blue shirt, blue jacket, because it looks like a uniform. You dress exactly as a terrorist dress. Some wore shoes, some didn't. Some were just completely civilian. Some wore 2 sets of clothing, others only wore 1. Some, depending on their rank, carried AKs, some carried SKSs. The way you walked was very important. When you're walking through the bush from one village to the other, you must walk like a terrorist, sloppy around the place. You mustn't walk in a straight line, left, right, because you look like soldiers. There were lots of little things that could give you away. So the dress-wise was a mixture of civilian, Portuguese clothing, Frelimo clothing, whatever took your fancy. Blue denims was a big favorite. Flops, just ordinary flip-flops, sandal-type shoes were also a big favorite because you can wear them. If you got into a contact, you took them off and you became barefoot and your prints became part of all the other local footprints in the area. Very difficult to track. 2 sets of clothing, you go into a contact, wearing your red set, you throw that off after the contact, you're now in your blue set, everybody's looking for somebody with red clothing. So there was method in their madness. It was basically everything goes. And like I said, the biggest thing that I found that gave us away was uniformity, the way we walked, the way we dressed, went to extremes not to look like army guys. No short back and side haircut. Afros were the in thing. You had to try and somehow get away from the army training because a lot of those guys were from RAR and they had been in the RAR for a couple of years. RAR was a brilliant unit, well known for its discipline. And to try and get them to kick that habit of lining up the buttons with the buckle on the belt and everything nice and shiny and pressed and creased took a lot of work and a lot of looking at. So there were many things that could compromise you, but the dress was one of the main ones and the walk. And the terrorists had other things. You weren't allowed to eat this. You weren't allowed to say that. You weren't allowed to drink this. There was a lot to it, more than just the dress and the way you walked. I also discussed that a lot in my book. The book that screws up, where it's got a list of what you can wear, what tactics the terrorists use, what trick questions they asked you to try and get you to try and compromise you. Basic things like when you arrive in a base camp, the Rajiva will come talk to you, you think everything's great, and the next thing, here comes 5 guys delivering food. That's wrong. You compromise. Guys don't deliver food. Chicks deliver food. So if that happens, you must know that you're going to get attacked. No, you compromise. You're blown out of the water. You've got to get out of that area or at least prepare yourself for an attack. Like I say, I can't go into detail here, but it's all in that book, Screws Up. It's a very interesting book. I cover terrorist training camps, what the terrorist actually goes through, and his training and what he gets taught about the Selous scouts. I don't know if I've lost the track of the question and I've wandered off a bit, but...
No, you're good, Andy. And I think I personally can relate to what you're saying here. And because as soon as you shift from conventional army style of operations to intelligence or pseudo-operations, it immediately becomes more than just a role. It becomes a lifestyle that you sort of have to completely absorb, where you sacrifice comfort, you adapt to environments, and you recalibrate everything from how you walk, talk, and think. And even the smallest detail, whether it's, your haircut, the way you wear your kit, can mean the difference between blending in or standing out. And standing out, as we all know, can be a fatal feature. And I can tell you from my own experience, tuning down those military instincts, dialing back that vigilance and precision that has been drilled into you over the years has saved my life countless of times. And I can just imagine that it has done the same for you, probably more times than you can even count. And speaking of operations, where those subtle details made all the difference, could you share a moment where the success or failure, of course, of a mission hinged on something as seemingly minor as a single person's actions or a specific piece of intel? Maybe something from Operation Eland or another key mission.
I think what was it? Eland, the one where we had that great success. I think it was Operation Eland, Pungwe. The similarity between that operation and the operation that we tried to do in the Ciskei, when the overthrow of the Ciskei president and the capture of his palace. The first operation, the Pungwe operation, I think it's Operation Eland, that whole operation revolved around one man, Morris Inyati. Morris Inyati was a secretarial commander. He was captured by some TF guys and he was handed over to Selous security branch. Somehow or the other, they turned Morris Inyati in a short period of time, a day or two, and he was on side. Apparently, Morris Inyati, at that stage, being a secretarial commander, had also had a big fallout with the Zandler army commander, and he was on tender hooks and he was a bit peed off with everybody. So once he got captured, then I don't know what offer they gave him, but he accepted it. Now they used Morris Inyati and his knowledge and his face. We used him to travel through Mozambique in vehicles at night with Morris Inyati as our front man. He was the guy that got us through everything, the roadblocks, and arrived us at Pungwe camp. He was the guy that got onto the loudspeaker when the mob of recruits all came running out towards the vehicle. He was the guy that got on the loudspeaker and said, "People, Zimbabwe is free. Rhodesia is no more. We have won." He was the guy, Morris Inyati. Now we go swap now to the attack in Ciskei on the palace. What we had done through a bit of pseudo work had set up the head of Ciskei intelligence. We said it's a long and devious plan. Anyway, we got him to meet us at night on the border between the Transkei and the Ciskei, and we managed to capture him. We, in fact, offered him also something that was too good to refuse, providing he gave us R1 million in small change. He duly arrived at the meeting point with R1 million in a suitcase. We then captured him and we took him to our headquarters, which at that stage is the Special Forces headquarters, was in Port St. John's. Now the idea was he is the head of the Ciskei security. We were going to do the same thing. Load up with vehicles, put the owns on the vehicle, put this head of the Ciskei intelligence guy on the front vehicle. We're going to arrive at the palace gates. They weren't going to let us in. This guy was the head of the Ciskei intelligence. He was going to say, "Hey, Hans, what's your problem? Open the gates, man. Get a grip of yourselves." And they would open the gates and we'd ride in and we'd catch Charles Sebi. That was the plan. Now, once again, plans and what happens in between is another story. But now this guy didn't want to turn. They had a hassle, 4 or 5 days, and it didn't work. He wouldn't turn. Now this guy used to report to Sebi, Charles Sebi, every day for a meeting. He was the head of Sebi's intelligence. Every day he was there. They discussed things. Sebi knew about this meeting where Charles was going to get captured or whatever, and it was going to cost $1 million, but he was all happy with this. Now this guy disappears for 5 days. He doesn't pitch. Nothing happened. Now even after all these red flags, knowing all this information, we still do what we did at Op Eland. We put him in a vehicle and he's going to take us to open the gate. Obviously, it didn't work. We arrived there at the palace. The welcoming committee was there, and it turned out to be a total disaster. We were lucky we didn't lose anybody killed. It was a big mess up. It was a big mess up. We got out of it. We had to bring in the helicopters to get us out. I myself covered it in a book. I ended up by myself in King Williamstown, dressed in my finest pseudo gear, beard nice and flowing, clean shaven. Okay, there I was, dressed up like a terrorist, blackened up with an AK, terrorist with AK waving everything, sitting in the middle of King Williamstown. I got the whole Ciskei army looking for me. So I just wanted to bring that up just as a matter to show.
If you can just give us one line at the end of that, Andy, because you do leave us sometimes on a cliffhanger. So sitting there, how did you manage to get out?
Okay.
With all that, did you ditch everything and just make a run?
No. So what I did on my wanderings, I came across the golf course. I washed all the cuck off. I got a bit of broken Coca-Cola bottle, shaved myself as best I could, and I knew the whole area around there was full of Ciskei troops and that all looking for me. So I figured the best thing I could do was go into town. So I went into town and there was this big church. So I was like, there you go. I'll go to the church, ask the padre. Yeah, hey, you know what I mean? To give me a helping hand. Went to the church, it's closed, went round the back to the padre's quarters, knocked on the door, big smile on my face, my heart pounding. I was bursting with hope. There it is, Savior is here. I said to him, look, he says, are you one of them? And he slammed the door in my face. Okay, so there I am now. So what I did, I then headed towards town because I had to get a telephone. There was one guy I knew in Port St. John's that maybe could help me. I eventually sidled into town, stopped there at a little cafe, had a Coke, and looked around and I saw a telephone, but it now across the road from the police station. There wasn't much choice. I went across to the telephone and I found my friend in Port St. John's because I thought that was the best bet I could do. I got all of him. I phoned him. His wife had parents living just outside outside King Williamstown in a farm. So he arranged with them to come and pick me up in King Williamstown at the garage, which was the first garage on the road coming into King Williamstown. So I sat there and I waited. I made the phone call, but there was nobody there. There was no army. There was no police. They were all in the bush looking for all the other guys. So I was lucky in that way. So I sat there and I waited. It was the longest wait I've ever had. It was like I was there, but I wasn't there. It was like I was up there in the sky looking down at myself. It was like my mind could no longer take the pressure and my body left. And I waited, and lo and behold, the dude pitched. I jumped in the car and I made it. He took me back to his farm. I got a hold of my headquarters there in the Transkei, and they sent a chopper to pick me up. And in the chopper was my friend and comrade, Ron Daly. And I jumped there.
Wow, what a way to round up this podcast, because I was just mentioning, you had said a little bit about Ron Daly earlier, and I think what a way to end it off, with that long career between the two of you. Andy, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. Really an amazing episode, and also just tell our listeners a little bit about your books. The current one, Skuzapu, where they can find it, and also a little bit about, we spoke about it earlier, your previous 2 editions, which Helen will re-release next year.
Okay, no, that's not a problem. Okay, my first 2 books. Look, I was at home. I was unemployed. I didn't have a job. Ex-military, I did a little bit of security work here, doing the boom, whatever, sell a bit of second-hand clothes, that sort of thing. So I decided I was going to write a book. My daughter gave me an old laptop to assist me, and I started to write. I did it maybe to make a few bob, but also to get the stuff off my chest. So my first book, which I called Bush War Operator, was about my childhood, my RLI experience and my Selous Scouts. It's an interesting book. And my Transkei adventures. The second book was a follow-on about that book, concentrating more on the stuff I'd left out on my first book, because the first book I wrote in a rush. Once I'd finished it and it got published, I realized I left a lot out. So I wrote the second book. Both more or less the same, the war from a white guy's point of view. Skuzapuna is a different story. This is a combined effort between me and one of my ex-pseudo team commanders, a guy by the name of Clements. His pseudo name was Kilamabunu, which is kill farmers. Okay, we got together. He's still in Zimbabwe. And via the WhatsApp, we made a plan. Now, this book is different to the other books. I don't think there's another book out there that goes into the detail of pseudo-ops and also looking at from a black person, a Rhodesian black soldier's point of view, a commander's point of view. All the other parts, like my book, is from my point of view, as I saw it, and not from the way he saw it. And in this book, if you read both books, my first book and my third book, you'll see, as you read, you'll notice that some of the operations he mentions, I also mention, and they sort of tie up. So those are the 3 books I've written.
We're going to add the links to the show notes, Andy, so we'll add it there. And then as we discussed previously, the 2 of us, Max and I, we will, with Underground Strategy, do the reviews. With Duncan this morning, he said about for Helian that they're going to put out your book, the new edition, next year for those that wanted, combining them. Maybe, as you mentioned, you might add some new material, which will be lovely for the readers. And Underground Strategy will be, we'll be happy to bring you back for that release of that book. And Max and I will do the reviews of all 3 and have it out, But as I said, in the next few months going into spring, Northern Hemisphere spring, just a lot on the plate. But as always, Max, last words to you.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Andy. It's been a real pleasure having you here today and listening to you sharing a part of your very exciting life story. I was a fan of your books already before this podcast, and this didn't make me less of a fan, and I'm truly hooked, and I'm looking forward to read your new book, Skusapo.
Thank you for your kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Like I said, especially Skusapo, Special Forces. You'll enjoy it.
You're very welcome, Andy, and I am 100% sure that I will. And to all our listeners, that was it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did making it. And don't forget to check out undergroundstrategy.com, where we have a plethora of articles, reviews, and other goodies. And of course, we will link to Andy's books both on social media and on undergroundstrategy.com. Now it's time for us to do something else, something tactical and maybe something cool. But we will be back next week. And until then, have a great one. Bye-bye.
And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak on your podcast. I really appreciated it. Thank you very much indeed.